Special edition of PFT PM, emergency edition, because we've been waiting for weeks for the league to announce the decisions, plural, in the tampering investigations at the Eagles and the Falcons. Both came out today, just minutes apart. The Eagles were accused or suspected of tampering with former Giants running back Saquon Barkley. The Falcons, as far as anyone knew, were being investigated for potentially tampering with former Vikings quarterback Kirk Cousins. So the first one that came out was the Eagles' decision. And that one's simpler. That one's cleaner. What happened was Penn State coach James Franklin, just after Saquon Barkley chose to sign with the Eagles, Franklin was talking to reporters, and he said that Philadelphia's pitch included GM Howie Roseman telling Barkley that there are plenty of Penn State fans who are also Eagles fans. On the surface, who cares? But it spoke to Franklin believing that Roseman spoke directly to Barkley during that 52-hour negotiating window where, under the rules, the only communications that can happen are players, agent, and team, unless the player represents himself. Barkley doesn't, so they couldn't speak to Barkley directly, period. If they had found that there had been communications directly between Howie Roseman and Saquon Barkley, it would have been a violation of the rules. And the precedent for that goes back to 2016 when the Chiefs lost a third-round pick and were fined various amounts for tampering with former Eagles receiver Jeremy Maclin the prior year, specifically speaking directly to him during the 52-hour negotiating window before the start of free agency, when deals can be done between player and team, but only via communications with the player's agent. Again, unless the player is self-represented, but that's not relevant in any of these cases. So here's the announcement that was issued by the NFL. After a thorough review of the Philadelphia Eagles signing of Saquon Barkley, the NFL today informed the club that the investigation did not discover sufficient evidence to support a finding that the anti-tampering policy was violated. In coming to this conclusion, the league reviewed phone logs, text messages, and other documents related to Philadelphia's free agency strategy and decision to sign Barkley. The NFL also interviewed several members of the organization, including Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni, as well as Barkley and Penn State head coach James Franklin. As with every review, should new evidence be uncovered, the league may reopen the investigation. So, look, it looks like the NFL really did everything in its power to get to the truth. Was there forbidden communication with Saquon Barkley during the 52-hour negotiating window? And there's some equivocation in the language. Didn't find sufficient evidence. Well, you found some. It doesn't say we found no evidence. It doesn't say the whole thing was just bogus. It doesn't say James Franklin misspoke. They just didn't find enough evidence to come to the conclusion that there was tampering. I don't know how much strategy was put into the wording of it, but the way lawyers usually do things, and surely the legal department at the NFL vetted this, crafted it, revised it, maybe just wrote the whole thing. Every word has meaning. And it sounds like there was something there, but there wasn't enough to come to the conclusion that there was tampering. And look, I thought, based upon the reporting from Adam Schefter of a couple of weeks ago, when he said that the resolution was coming, and this would have been the week of June 3rd, Monday the 3rd, at some point that week, both decisions were supposed to come. He said that the Falcons were expected to get it worse than the Eagles, which implied the Eagles were getting something. The Eagles ended up getting nothing. And I said at the time, well, you know what? Maybe the Eagles are going to get a third-round pick taken from them, because if you go to the Eagles and you press them and you have the evidence from James Franklin, maybe they just admit to it and take their punishment. Yes, we spoke to him. We're sorry. Do with us what you will, because we know what happens when the league believes you've lied to them. If they find out the truth later, it's even worse. And they left that little door open at the end with the should additional evidence come to light in the future, this could change. And if they would find out that they all got together, got their ducks in a row, remember that phrase from Bountygate, the league got pissed when they came to the conclusion that the Saints got their ducks in a row and got them even harder, I think, than they would have if the Saints had just admitted it. Now, that's all supposition and speculation. For now, they did the investigation, and they came to the conclusion there is no violation. That's part one. No violation for the Eagles, no punishment for the Eagles. Part two, this one's more significant because this, to me, was the most blatant example of tampering that I've ever seen as it relates to pre-free agency communications during that 52-hour negotiating window when the communication should happen only with the player's agent. And we know about this because just a couple of hours after the free agency period officially opened on March 13 of 2024, 4 p.m. Eastern, here's Kirk Cousins, newest member of the Falcons, talking to reporters. And what did he say? Without prompting, one, he spoke on Tuesday with the team's head athletic trainer, and he started to say met and corrected himself. And that made some people suspicious. Did he really meet? And did he know he shouldn't say that? Or did he misspeak? But he spoke to the head athletic trainer on Tuesday during the forbidden window. Then, Cousins said, he spoke with Director of Player Personnel Ryan Pace, the former Bears GM. And he didn't specifically say Tuesday, but given that it was just a couple of hours after he could have spoken to anybody directly from the team anyway, common sense suggests he spoke to Pace during the forbidden window. Then, on top of that, Cousins said that he got involved on Tuesday during the 52-hour negotiating window in recruiting Darnell Mooney, the Bears receiver, to sign with the Falcons. I mean, when you think about it, this was, and I've said this before, inception level dream within a dream, tampering within tampering. The Falcons so thoroughly tampered with Cousins during the 52-hour window that they recruited him to be the implement of their tampering with Darnell Mooney, because what he said was he got on the phone and closed the deal. How do you do that? How does that happen? The Falcons should only be speaking to Mooney's agent. Here's Cousins speaking to Mooney. Cousins, as an unofficial member of the Falcons, at the behest of the Falcons, presumably, or at least with the knowledge of the Falcons, who he shouldn't even be talking to, talking directly to Darnell Mooney. Then, the fourth item, Cousins admitted that Kyle Pitts, the Falcons tight end, had been recruiting him for multiple weeks before they got to the pre-free agency window. If Pitts did that with the knowledge of or at the behest of the team, it's game over. It's another tampering violation. 4 tampering violations, including tampering within tampering, tampering with Cousins to the point where he tampered with Darnell Mooney. So, hey, if you're going to do a fair investigation and a fair imposition of discipline in light of precedent, and the best precedent, Dolphins losing a first-round pick and a third-round pick for tampering with Tom Brady and Sean Payton, and they didn't even sign or hire those two guys. And they lost a 1 and a 3 with major fines attached to it. So, what happens to the Falcons? Well, and before we even get to that, the Falcons were found to have tampered with 3 players: Kirk Cousins, Mooney, and, previously unknown, 49ers tight end Charlie Warner, who signed with the Falcons as well. 5th-round pick in 2025 is the penalty. $250,000 fine for the Falcons, parking ticket for a multi-billion-dollar company, and a $50,000 fine for GM Terry Fontenot. I would guess when you look at percentages of net worth, that hurts Fontenot a lot more than the $250,000 hurts the Atlanta Falcons. Yeah, 5-1. I would say that Terry Fontenot is not worth 1/5 of what the Falcons are worth. If he is, what the hell is he doing working? So here's the official statement from the league, and I think it's significant for what it says and what it doesn't say. The NFL today informed the Atlanta Falcons of the discipline being imposed for violations of the anti-tampering policy related to improper contact with prospective unrestricted free agents Kirk Cousins, Darnell Mooney, and Charlie Warner during the 2-day negotiating period prior to the start of the 2024 league year. Atlanta will forfeit its original 5th-round pick in the 2025 NFL Draft and pay a fine of $250,000, while General Manager Terry Fontenot has been fined $50,000. While the policy permits clubs to engage with and negotiate all aspects of an NFL player contract with the certified agent of any prospective unrestricted free agent during the 2-day negotiating period. Any direct contact between the player and an employee or representative of the club is prohibited. This includes discussion of travel arrangements or other logistical matters which the club acknowledges took place with regard to these 3 players. Now, it doesn't flat out say that's the only violation that occurred, but that's the upshot of this. Basically, the Falcons admitted they spoke to the 3 players about travel arrangements and other logistics. Now, look at it this way. The rule says, generally, there can be no discussion about travel logistics, even with the agent. Why would you need to talk directly to the player to work out the logistics for travel when you're already talking to the agent about the contract? Why would you risk violating the policy? I mean, if you're going to violate the policy, let's subsume those conversations within the conversations that are allowed to happen anyway with the agent. Why do you need to talk directly to the player to talk about travel? That on its surface, and I hadn't thought about that until just right now, that's fishy. You don't need to talk to the player about travel arrangements. Talk to his agent about travel arrangements, and the agent can then talk to the player. That's cleaner. That avoids this situation. And it tells me that it's more than that. And the reason that I'm just kind of skeptical and completely dismissive of and will reject outright the idea that this was just talking about travel. Tom Pelissero, who works for the NFL, who gets a paycheck from the NFL. And look, I know that people don't like it when I say it. It's never stopped me from saying it. Anybody who works for NFL media is inherently conflicted when it comes to reporting on NFL matters as it relates to teams, or more importantly, as it relates to league matters. There's only so much you can say without pissing off the person who signs your paycheck. And sometimes you're expected to hold your nose and tell the world what the NFL wants us all to believe. Pelissero says key part of the NFL's findings on the Falcons. The violations were found to have occurred during the 2-day negotiating window, not before it opened, talking to players about flights after they'd legally agreed to terms. Hence, less discipline than in some other cases. And I say to that, bullcrap. There was more to it than that. And if you compare and contrast the 2 statements, look at what the league said it did with the Eagles. Bear with me while I pull the story back up. The league said in its announcement that, I don't need glasses officially, but when I'm looking at my phone, there's a sweet spot where I just, too close, too far, just right. The NFL reviewed phone logs, text messages, and other documents. Also interviewed several members of the organization, Roseman, Sirianni, Barkley, and James Franklin. There's none of that in the Falcons statement. And that was one of the things that I raised from the get-go. How aggressive, how zealous, how comprehensive will these investigations be as it relates to the Falcons? You've already got Kirk Cousins handing you the roadmap. He's admitted to violations that were made, and he's given you enough that you're on notice. How far are you going to go? What are you going to do? Who are you going to talk to? Cousins was asked several weeks back, did he have to turn over his phone? And he kind of laughed and dismissed it. And he said, I don't think anything is going to come of that. It just gives you an idea that they really weren't as aggressive as they've been with others like the Patriots in Deflategate. See, this is the fundamental problem I have with the league office when it comes to enforcing rules. And I lived this when I practiced law. Let me give you a quick aside here. I used to represent people who had lost their jobs under circumstances that I believed reflected a violation of the law, whether it was based on race, gender, age, religion, disability, complaining about safety-related issues where the employer either didn't want to spend the money to make it right or didn't like having a troublemaker in their midst. And in those situations, no one ever admits to it. So the way you prove the case is to show that you've got people who did the same or similar things than whatever the person was officially fired for, and they didn't get fired, or they didn't even get disciplined. Inconsistency in the treatment of employees is one of the ways, and it's still very difficult, It's one of the ways that you can prove that the official version is a crock of crap. That is one of the reasons why I'm very sensitive to the NFL having these policies that get applied based upon whatever they want to do. We want to whack the Patriots, we're going to whack the Patriots. We're going to do a crazy investigation that works from the conclusion backward to prove that there was violation of the rule regarding air pressure in footballs, even though nobody knows where the hell the rule comes from, and even though the evidence at best was inconclusive as to whether or not they did it that day. The hell with that. We want to whack them. We're going to whack them. Somebody else does something that's a violation, they look the other way. And this is where various other dynamics come into play, like Rich McKay, Falcons executive, on the competition committee. When they got busted for using fake crowd noise, it was another slap on the wrist. We compared it to something that happened with the 49ers, where they got punished for some sort of clerical error in salary cap accounting, and they got it worse than the Falcons for fake crowd noise. It was laughable. So that's one of the issues I have. There really isn't consistency. The league wants to make it up as it goes. The league gets upset when they get accused of making it up as they go, but they still make it up as they go. I think they get upset because they don't like people to point out they're making it up as they go. They want to have full and complete discretion to decide in any given case what we're going to do. So on the surface, you can look at this and say, hey, the message to the league is go ahead and tamper. Tamper with 3 players. All that's going to happen is you're going to lose a 5th-round pick and pay a $250,000 fine. You get the players. Well, I wouldn't advise teams like the Patriots, the Raiders, or the Saints to try that, because that's when they decide to make an example out of you. That's the problem. There is no fairness. There is no consistency. It is we do what we want, when we want, how we want, and they're never transparent about it. See, I'd love to be able to interview somebody from the league office about what was done here. What were the steps taken? And I'm going to ask the league. I'd like to know what the actual investigative process was for the Falcons. I'll ask the question, and here's what will happen. They won't answer me at all. I'll have to remember tomorrow to ask again. They won't answer me at all. And if I remember to ask a 3rd time, maybe I'll get a no comment. Maybe. Usually it takes 3. It's like the number of licks it takes to get to the Tootsie Roll center of a Tootsie Pop. 3. Usually. And I'm sorry if anybody at 345 Park Avenue doesn't like this, but I say this all the time. You created this monster with the grandiose NFL films, videos in the early 70s that put the NFL on a pedestal that I expect you to live up to. People say, why do you hate the NFL? I love the NFL. And I hold the stewards of the NFL accountable when I need to. This thing stinks, and I'm going to continue to try to get to the bottom of what happened here, because what the Falcons did, based upon what Kirk Cousins said, was more than lining up travel arrangements. And again, ask yourself the very simple question. Why do you need, when you already have a line of communication with the players' agents, why not just set up the travel arrangements with them? So there's never a question as to whether or not you spoke with any of these players when you shouldn't have. And I look at it as they just decided, screw the rules. We're going to do whatever we want. It's the old saying, it's better to seek forgiveness than request permission. We're just going to do what we want. And when it all blows up, whatever happens to us is going to be nothing compared to what it should have been. And I it's going to be funny on social media because all the Falcons fans are like, oh, go cry more. Fine. But if it happened to you, if it happens to your team, and maybe one of these days it will, what are you going to say? When it's this Wild West approach to free agency, when one of your key free agents is in that 52-hour window and somebody tampers with them when they shouldn't, what are you going to say? When the team that does the tampering doesn't get punished. But here's the reality. If that team is the Patriots, the Raiders, the Saints, the Dolphins, any team that isn't in the good graces of 345 Park Avenue, maybe it'll be a real punishment. So, the bottom line is this. It pays to be connected. It pays to have one of your key executives, the chair of the competition committee, and in tight in league circles. It pays. It pays. When something like this happens, you don't get punished the way that other teams would. So that's the bottom line. That is this edition of PFT PM. By the way, programming note, after Friday, June 14, PFT Live is off until after the Olympics. I'll be sitting right here most weekdays, giving you the latest on what's happening in the NFL, up to and including any further updates as it relates to the Eagles and Falcons tampering cases or whatever else might happen. Because one thing we've learned this offseason, it never slows down. Thanks as always for some of your time. See you next time. Hi, it's Mike Florio. Thanks for watching PFT on YouTube. Hit subscribe for the latest news and analysis from Pro Football Talk.